You wake up and the first thing you feel is not rest but the faint hum of everything you didn't finish yesterday. Your eyes open and before you've even sat up, your hand is already reaching for your phone. You tell yourself you're just checking the time, but that's not really true. You're checking if anything happened while you were asleep. You're scanning for urgency. You're looking for proof that the world kept moving without you and now you have to catch up. The screen is bright and cold in your hand. There are messages. There are emails. There are little red circles with numbers inside them. You swipe through them without really reading, just enough to know what's waiting. You haven't even gotten out of bed yet and already you're behind. Already you're making a list in your head. Already you're calculating how much time you have and how much time you'll need and whether it's enough. It never feels like enough. You get up and move through the morning in a kind of low-grade rush. Not because you're late necessarily, but because rushing has become the default. You brush your teeth while thinking about the meeting later. You make coffee but you don't really taste it. You're just moving from one task to the next, and even when there's time, even when there's no real deadline pressing on you, you feel this tightness in your chest that says you should be going faster. You should be doing more. You sit down to work and open your computer and immediately there are 12 tabs and 4 windows and a notification in the corner and a message that just came in and you haven't even started the thing you're supposed to be working on. You start typing. You stop. You check something. You start again. You're working technically, but it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like you're pushing a heavy object uphill and every few minutes it rolls back down a little and you have to push it again. The day continues like this. You move between tasks without really finishing any of them. You answer emails that generate more emails. You attend meetings that create more meetings. You cross things off your list and add twice as many. And all the while there's this voice in the back of your mind saying you're not doing enough, you're not doing it right, you're falling behind, everyone else is moving faster, you need to work harder, you need to focus more, you need to be better. By the afternoon your shoulders are tight. You didn't notice when it started but now they're up near your ears and your jaw is clenched and your breathing is shallow. You're holding yourself like you're bracing for impact. Like if you relax for even a second, everything will fall apart. So you don't relax. You keep going. You keep pushing. You drink more coffee even though you're already jittery. You tell yourself you'll rest later. You tell yourself you just need to get through this one thing and then you'll take a break. But when you finish that one thing there's another thing waiting, and another after that, and the break never comes. You look at the clock and somehow hours have passed and you can't really remember what you did with them. You were busy the whole time. You were working the whole time. But when you try to point to what you actually accomplished, it's hard to say. It's all a blur of half-finished tasks and interrupted thoughts and moments where you stared at the screen without really seeing it. You weren't distracted exactly. You were trying. You were trying so hard. But it's like the harder you try, the less you get done. The more you push, the more resistance you feel. Evening comes and you're exhausted but you can't stop. There's still more to do. There's always more to do. You eat dinner without tasting it. You sit on the couch with your laptop and tell yourself you're just going to check one thing, just going to finish this one small task and then you'll be done for the day. But one thing becomes 3 things becomes an hour, and when you finally close the laptop your eyes are burning and your head is heavy and you feel like you've been running all day without getting anywhere. You get ready for bed and you're so tired, but your mind won't stop. It's still making lists, still replaying conversations, still thinking about what you have to do tomorrow and what you didn't do today and what you should have done differently. You lie down and close your eyes and the thoughts keep coming. You try to push them away but that just makes them louder. You try to relax but you've forgotten how. Your body is exhausted but your brain is still running at full speed, and sleep, when it finally comes, feels less like rest and more like a brief pause before you have to start all over again. This is what the days look like now. This is what productivity has become. Not the satisfying completion of meaningful work, but a constant state of low-level panic. A feeling that you're always behind, always rushing, always not quite good enough. You're busy all the time but you never feel like you're actually getting anywhere. You're working harder than you've ever worked but you're more exhausted than you've ever been. And the strange thing is, you can't really remember when it started. Feels like it's always been this way. Like this is just what work is, what life is. A series of obligations and deadlines and notifications and tasks that never end. But sometimes, in those rare moments when you stop moving long enough to notice, you feel something underneath the exhaustion. A question. A small, quiet voice that asks, does it have to be this way? You're sitting at your desk in the middle of the afternoon and suddenly you realize you've been holding your breath. You've been clenching your jaw. You've been pushing so hard for so long that your whole body has become a knot of tension. And you wonder what would happen if you just stopped. If you just let go. If you just breathe. Not because you decided to be more mindful or because you're trying to practice some technique, but because in that moment you simply can't keep pushing anymore. You're too tired. You're too worn out. And so you stop. And in that moment of stopping, something shifts. The work is still there. The emails are still there. The deadlines haven't changed. But something in you relaxes just slightly. The urgency loosens its grip just for a second. And you notice that the sky outside is a particular shade of blue. You notice the sound of someone talking in the next room. You notice that your coffee, even though it's cold now, still smells good. These are small things. They don't solve anything. They don't make your to-do list any shorter. But they're real. They're here. And for a moment, you're here too, instead of 10 steps ahead in your mind, worrying about what comes next. This is not something you can force. That's the strange part. You can't make yourself relax by adding relax to your list of things to do. You can't schedule moments of presence between your meetings and expect them to appear on command. The more you try to control it, the more it slips away. It's like trying to fall asleep by commanding yourself to sleep. The effort itself becomes the obstacle. You start to notice how much of your energy goes into pushing, into forcing, into trying to make things happen through sheer will. You wake up and immediately start pushing yourself out of bed, into the shower, through breakfast, into work. You push through the morning, through the afternoon. You push through tiredness, through boredom, through resistance. And it works, sort of. You get things done. But there's a cost. By the end of the day, you're not just tired from the work itself. You're tired from the effort of pushing. From the constant internal battle between what you want to do and what you think you should be doing. You start to wonder what your work would look like if you weren't always fighting against yourself. If you could move through your day without that constant sense of friction. Without the voice that says you're not doing enough, not fast enough, not good enough. You don't know what that would look like exactly. But you know the current approach isn't working. You know that something has to change. The problem is, you've been told your whole life that success requires effort. That you have to push through obstacles. That you have to force yourself to do hard things. And that's true in a way. Things do require effort. But there's a difference between effort and strain. Between working hard and grinding yourself down. Between moving towards something and running away from the feeling of not being enough. You've lost track of which one you're doing. Maybe they've become so tangled up that you can't tell them apart anymore. You sit down to work on something important, something you actually care about, and immediately you feel resistance. Your mind wants to do anything else. Check your phone. Get more coffee. Organize your desk. The resistance feels like laziness, so you push through it. You force yourself to focus. You use willpower like a blunt instrument, beating your attention into submission. And maybe it works for a little while. Maybe you get something done. But then the next day the resistance is stronger. The willpower is weaker. And you have to push even harder just to get the same result. What if the resistance isn't the problem? What if the problem is the pushing? You think about water. You think about how it moves. It doesn't push against obstacles. It doesn't force its way through. It finds the path of least resistance. It goes around. It flows. And eventually, given enough time, it can wear down mountains. Not through force but through persistence. Through following its nature. You've heard this idea before, probably. It sounds nice. Poetic. But what does it actually mean for you, sitting at your desk at 3 in the afternoon with a deadline looming and a mind that won't cooperate? Maybe it means noticing where the resistance is coming from. Maybe it means asking why you're trying to force yourself to work on this particular thing in this particular way at this particular time. Maybe there's a reason your mind keeps wandering. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you actually need a break and your body is trying to tell you that, but you're too busy ignoring it and pushing through. Or maybe the task itself is structured wrong. Maybe you're trying to do too much at once. Maybe you need to break it down. Maybe you need to start somewhere else. This is not permission to avoid hard things. This is not an excuse to quit whenever something feels difficult. But there's a difference between difficult and forced. Difficult means you're learning something new, stretching yourself, growing. Forced means you're fighting against your own nature, trying to make yourself into something you're not, trying to work in a way that doesn't fit. Difficult can be energizing. Forced is always draining. You start to pay attention to what your work feels like. Not just what you're doing, but how it feels in your body. There are times when you're working and hours pass without you noticing. You're absorbed. You're engaged. The work is hard, but it's also interesting. It pulls you forward. You're not thinking about productivity or efficiency or whether you're doing enough. You're just doing. And at the end of those hours, even though you're tired, it's a good tired. A satisfied tired. The kind that comes from using yourself fully, not from grinding yourself down. And then there are other times when every minute feels like an hour. When you're constantly checking the clock. When you're forcing yourself to pay attention, forcing yourself to care, forcing yourself to keep going. And at the end of those hours you're exhausted in a different way. Depleted. hollowed out. You got things done maybe, but it felt like dragging yourself through mud. And the strange thing is, the work itself isn't necessarily harder. Sometimes the forced work is actually easier, technically. But it feels harder because you're not just doing the work. You're also doing the work of forcing yourself to do the work. What if productivity isn't about pushing harder? What if it's about paying attention to the difference between these two states? Between flow and force? Between work that pulls you forward and work that you have to drag yourself through? What if the goal isn't to optimize every minute of your day, but to structure your day in a way that creates more of the first kind of work and less of the second? This sounds simple, but it's not. Because the world doesn't care about your flow state. The world has deadlines and expectations and demands that don't align with when you feel most energized or most creative or most capable. You can't just decide to only work when you feel like it. That's not realistic. That's not how life works. But maybe you can start to notice the patterns. Maybe you can start to see when you do your best work and what conditions make that possible, and how you might structure things differently to create those conditions more often. You notice that you work better in the morning. Your mind is clearer. You have more energy. But you spend your mornings in meetings and answering emails and putting out fires, and by the time you get to the important work, the deep work, the work that actually matters, it's afternoon and you're already tired. So you push through. You force it. And it takes twice as long and feels twice as hard, and the quality isn't as good. And then you stay late to make up for it, which means you don't sleep enough, which means the next morning you're even more tired, and the cycle continues. What if you protected your mornings? What if you said no to some things so you could say yes to the things that matter? This feels impossible. Feels selfish. Feels like you're letting people down. But what if the current approach is actually letting people down more? What if by trying to do everything you're not doing anything particularly well? What if by spreading yourself too thin you're not actually serving anyone? You start to experiment. You block off 2 hours in the morning just for focused work. You turn off notifications. You close your email. You put your phone in another room. And at first it feels wrong. Uncomfortable. Like you're missing something important. Like something urgent is happening somewhere and you're not responding. But you stay with it. You sit with the discomfort. And slowly, gradually you start to work. Not forced work. Not grinding through it work. But actual work. The kind where time disappears. Where you look up and realize an hour has passed and you're still engaged, still interested, still going. And the strange thing is, you get more done in those 2 hours than you usually get done in a whole day of interrupted, distracted, constantly switching between tasks work. Not because you're pushing harder, but because you're not pushing at all. You're just working. You're following your attention instead of fighting it. You're moving with the current instead of swimming against it. And it's not always easy. Sometimes the work is genuinely hard. Sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes you have to think deeply about difficult problems. But it's a different kind of hard. It's engaged hard, not forced hard. It's the difference between climbing a mountain because you want to see the view and climbing a mountain because someone is pushing you from behind. You realize how much energy you've been wasting. Not on the work itself, but on the meta work. The work of managing your guilt about not working enough. The work of comparing yourself to others. The work of trying to convince yourself to focus. The work of feeling bad about being distracted. The work of worrying about everything you're not doing while you're trying to do something else. All of this uses energy. All of this creates exhaustion. And none of it produces anything valuable. What if you could just let that go? What if you could work when you're working and rest when you're resting and stop trying to do both at the same time? This sounds obvious, but it's not how you actually live. You rest with one eye on your work. You work with one eye on the break you'll take later if you earn it. You're never fully anywhere. You're always split, always divided, always feeling like you should be somewhere else doing something else. You take a walk in the middle of the day. Not because you decided to implement a healthy habit, but because you're stuck on something and you need to move. And while you're walking, not thinking about the problem, just walking, noticing the trees and the sky and the way your body feels, the solution appears. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped forcing it. Because you gave your mind space to wander. Because you trusted that stepping away doesn't mean giving up. This is the part that's hard to accept. That sometimes doing less is more productive than doing more. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is nothing. Not mindless scrolling, nothing. Not numbing out, nothing. But actual rest. Actual space. Actual emptiness where something new can emerge. You've been so afraid of wasting time. So afraid of being lazy. So afraid of falling behind. And that fear has been driving you for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to move without it. You've forgotten what it's like to work because you're interested in the work, not because you're terrified of what will happen if you don't. You've forgotten what it's like to rest because you're actually tired, Not because you've earned it or scheduled it or convinced yourself you deserve it. What would it be like to trust yourself? To trust that you don't need to be constantly monitored and managed and pushed and prodded? To trust that if you give yourself space, you won't just collapse into endless distraction and avoidance? To trust that you actually want to do good work, that you actually care about the things you're working on, and that if you remove all the forcing and pushing and grinding, something genuine might emerge? This is scary. Because what if you're wrong? What if you do need all that external and internal pressure to function? What if without it, you really would just waste away doing nothing? But you're exhausted. You're burned out. The current approach isn't sustainable. Something has to change. And maybe the change isn't about adding more techniques or strategies or systems. Maybe it's about removing something. Maybe it's about letting go of the belief that you're fundamentally lazy, fundamentally inadequate, fundamentally in need of constant correction. You start to notice the things you do naturally, without forcing. You notice that when you're genuinely interested in something, you don't have to convince yourself to work on it. You just do. You notice that when you're rested, when you're fed, when you're not overwhelmed, you're actually quite capable. You notice that some of your best ideas come when you're not trying to have ideas. When you're in the shower or making dinner or lying in bed before sleep. You notice that your mind is actually quite good at solving problems, but only when you stop strangling it with demands for immediate solutions. What if your natural state isn't lazy? What if you're not actually broken or flawed or in need of fixing? What if the exhaustion and the resistance and the difficulty focusing aren't personal failures but reasonable responses to unreasonable demands? What if you're tired because you've been running at an unsustainable pace? What if you're distracted because you're overwhelmed? What if you can't focus because you're trying to focus on 17 things at once? You start to simplify. Not because you've decided to be a minimalist or because you read something about essentialism, but because you're tired of juggling. You're tired of having 40 tabs open. You're tired of starting 10 things and finishing none of them. You're tired of saying yes to everything and then resenting everything. You pick one thing. Just one. And you work on that. And it's hard to not immediately open another tab, to not check your email, to not think about all the other things. But you keep coming back. Gently. Without judgment. Just noticing when your attention wanders and bringing it back. And slowly something starts to shift. The work starts to feel different. Less like something you have to do and more like something you're choosing to do. Less like obligation and more like engagement. You're not pretending the deadlines don't exist. You're not ignoring your responsibilities. But you're approaching them differently. You're working with yourself instead of against yourself. You're paying attention to your energy instead of trying to override it. You're asking what needs to happen instead of what you think should happen. Some days this works. Some days you find the flow. You work steadily and calmly, and when the day ends you feel satisfied. You did what you needed to do and you didn't have to destroy yourself to do it. And some days it doesn't work. Some days you're tired or distracted or overwhelmed and nothing flows and everything feels hard. And on those days you have a choice. You can push through. You can force it. You can grind and strain and exhaust yourself trying to be productive anyway. Or you can accept that this is not a good day for this particular kind of work, and maybe there's something else you can do, something smaller or simpler or more suited to your current state. This isn't about being lazy. This isn't about giving up. This is about being realistic. About recognizing that you're not a machine that produces the same output under all conditions. You're a human being with a body and a mind that have needs and limits and rhythms. And when you work with those instead of against them, you're not less productive. You're more productive. Not in the hustle culture grind everyday sense, but in the actually getting meaningful things done sense. You start to care less about looking productive and more about being effective. You stop measuring your worth by how busy you are. You stop wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor. You stop competing in the unspoken contest of who can work the longest hours and sleep the least and sacrifice the most. You realize that none of that actually matters. What matters is the quality of your work, the depth of your attention, the care you bring to what you do. And all of that suffers when you're running on empty. You start to build in space, not as an afterthought or a reward, but as a necessary part of the process. Space to think, space to rest, space for things to settle. You stop booking yourself back to back for an entire day. You stop saying yes to everything. You stop trying to optimize every minute. You let things take the time they take. You trust that there's value in the pauses, in the gaps, in the moments between efforts. This feels vulnerable. Feels like you're doing less. Feels like you're falling behind. But when you look at what you're actually producing, when you look at the quality of your work and your ideas and your thinking, it's better. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're trying differently. Because you're giving yourself the conditions you need to do good work instead of trying to force good work out of bad conditions. You wonder how much of your life you've spent fighting yourself. How much energy you've wasted on that internal battle. How much better things might be if you could just stop. If you could work when work makes sense and rest when rest makes sense and stop trying to do everything all the time. If you could trust that you don't need to be constantly productive to have value. That you don't need to earn your right to exist through endless output. And maybe this doesn't solve everything. Maybe you still have deadlines. Maybe you still have obligations. Maybe the world still demands things from you that don't align with your natural rhythms. But maybe within that there's still room to move differently. To notice what you can control and what you can't. To stop fighting the things you can't change and start working with the things you can. To find the small pockets of choice within the larger structure of constraint. You can't always choose what you work on, but you can choose how you approach it. You can't always choose when to work, but you can choose whether to work with yourself or against yourself. You can't always choose your circumstances, but you can choose whether to add unnecessary suffering on top of the necessary difficulty. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's where the change starts. Not with a complete overhaul of your life or a revolutionary new system, but with a simple recognition, with a noticing, with a question. What if you didn't have to force it? What if you could let yourself be carried, at least sometimes, by your own genuine interest and energy? What if productivity didn't have to feel like violence? You don't have the answer. You're still figuring it out. You still have days where you fall back into the old patterns, where you push and force and grind, where you exhaust yourself trying to be enough. But more and more you notice when it's happening. You feel the strain. You recognize the quality of forced versus flow. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you're able to stop, to breathe, to ask what actually needs to happen here, to find a way that's not about forcing. And in those moments something opens, just slightly, just enough to remember that there might be another way, that you don't have to live like this. That rest is not a reward for productivity but a requirement for it. That your worth is not measured by your output. That you're allowed to be a human being, not a human doing. That maybe, just maybe, you're already enough.